We have to put up with that from our side of the building every day. Well, look, to me, we know about the challenges around the world, and certainly those will be discussed today. But the three greatest challenges I think we have are legacy items. And that is what has been left over from what the last administration has done in dealing with foreign policy issues. I travel by myself most of the time. I typically don't go on large hotels. A lot of commercial flights. I end up having conversations with leaders around the world that are different than the kind you have when you have 3 or 4 people asking questions. And one of the things I find most troubling with them is the lack of U.S. credibility. You sit down and you talk with them, and what they'll tell you is that Putin is into their countries, especially in the Middle East. What he has discussed with them constantly is that actually people not from the United States of America. So one of the great challenges that we have in the foreign policy arena is to reestablish that credibility. So when we say we're going to do something, people can count on that. When we have established relations that have been going on for decades, people understand that those relationships are important to us. The second piece is prioritization. I mean, if you look at the last administration, everything was a priority. You name it. I mean, social changes within the Pentagon, child marriages, all these things are no doubt issues that need to be dealt with at some level. But everything was a priority. If you just look at the travel schedules of Hillary Clinton and John Kerry, I mean, their goal was to visit as many countries as possible, but you never could figure out what was a priority of our nation. Many of you, some of you are new congressmen, new senators, and you find that your staff is set up for you sometimes 28 meetings a day. Very quickly you realize that you've got to prioritize. There's only 3 or 4 things that you can do really, really well. I talked to Rex Tillerson. I knew Secretary of State will be confirmed next week. He's got a strategic mind, and I think he fully understands that from a foreign policy standpoint, we've got to reprioritize. We've got to prioritize, actually, make sure that we're doing a few things really, really well in addressing the most important issues that we have to deal with. The third piece is disconnect. I find that so much of what we have done is totally disconnected from what our nation's national interests are. And importantly, we saw this play out during the campaign, disconnected from the American people. I mean, one of the things that I think we all know, if we're going to sustain commitments around the world, the American people have got to understand that what we're doing is important to them. And again, I think we saw throughout the course of this campaign, the American people today are not so much connected to what we're doing in foreign policy around the world. It's up to us to ensure that people understand that what we're doing is important to their own lives. Without that, you cannot understand. And I think that even though I know the Trump administration said some things during the campaign that were different than what some of us up here have seen and thought would be in the best interest of our country, I do believe they're establishing a theme of people that is much more in the mainstream of U.S. foreign policy. Let me just close with this. The greatest threat to our country's national security really isn't China, ISIS, or Russia. It isn't some of the destabilizing issues that are happening in Europe. It's us. Every leader at the Pentagon, every military leader, every person who focuses on what's happening around the world understands that China looks at us. They look at themselves as a nation on the ascendancy. They look at the United States and Western powers as being on the decline. And they do so because they look at democracies. They look at people like us in the room that are determining the future of our country. And they don't believe that over time we have the willingness to make the tough decisions that need to be made to keep our nation strong. Sometimes when you get elected, it's almost like when you get a majority, it's almost like a party atmosphere. I do hope that do both that. Let's not forget the fact that with $20 trillion in debt and another $10 trillion projected over the next 10 years, our inability to wrestle with that issue and deal with it and ourselves prioritize within our own government, that really is our greatest threat. And I look forward to working with all of you to make sure that we overcome that gap.
Let me disagree with Chairman Porter in terms of his assessment there. And let me add that we're going to face a challenge very, very soon. Our new president is going to have to deal with Kim Jong-un and the fact that these ballistic missile launches that now are being done by submarine are being combined with this effort in North Korea to shrink nuclear warheads so that they can go on these ballistic missiles, which are in their submarines. And we do have a tool here that we did not have before. Very, very late in the session, we passed out the North Korea Sanctions Act. And this new tool has now put a whole panoply of sanctions on North Korea. And one of the key events that you heard yesterday was the defection of the highest ranking North Korean we've seen in 20 years. And Young Ho tells us that it's a slippery slope now for the government. That this is like it was in 2005 when we had the sanctions on the Bank of Delta Asia. If you remember, at that time Treasury went forward and gave all the banks, the 11 banks in China, a choice. They could do business with the United States or they could do it with North Korea, but not both. And we cut off their access to hard currency. And as a result, the dictator could not pay his jobs. That's not a good position for a dictator to be in. And for 8 years, we've had what the outgoing administration calls strategic patience. That was the terminology for their engagement with North Korea. Strategic patience. We now have a different set of tools because of the legislation we've passed. And if we fully enforce this, this is what the defector tells us. He says that the consequence of this, in terms of opposition internally to the regime, when combined with outside information that's now coming into the country, give them for the first time hope of changing that regime, of replacing that regime. Now I can tell you this. What we need right now is a message to other regimes. If we're viewed as ineffectual on the world stage, then now is the time to block access to all currency, because we knew last time it cut out their missile program because they couldn't buy on the black market anything they needed to go forward. And it almost toppled the regime until the State Department got involved and pushed for lifting the sanctions and engaging again. We need to move forward and do this. And do it in tandem with another tool that we just passed. And that tool is the reforms of the Broadcasting Board of Governors. Working with Matt Thornberry and our other chairman here, what we were able to do was to replace the old ineffectual Broadcasting Board of Governors. Now we'll have a new CEO come into that position. We'll have a very different objective than we've seen in the past. I'll give you an example, not just with North Korea, but with social media, with television, with radio. For the last 8 years, this administration has reached out to Iran and reached out to the Ayatollah instead of reaching out to the people of Iran. So if you've monitored the broadcasts, you know that even in December, we were hearing broadcasts into Iran about how Washington wanted to embrace, be close to the Ayatollah, but that Donald Trump was an impediment. All of that is going to change. Now the broadcasting will reach out to the people who had an election stolen from them in Iran. We'll reach out to what Gallup tells us is that 2/3 of the population who want a Western-style democracy without a theocracy in Iran. They, for the first time, are going to hear the kind of messaging that Ronald Reagan, and I heard this on an exchange program in East Germany, that Reagan was doing on political pluralism, on tolerance, on the issue of what was actually happening, what those totalitarian regimes were doing in Eastern Europe. This is going to be the messaging now going forward that we construct into Iran. And on top of it, we've just done the extension of the Iran Sanctions Act, giving us the additional capability of putting in place, for every violation we find, an action which will pressure that regime. We also have the Hezbollah Sanctions Act, which we passed some months ago, almost a year ago now. And that will allow us to block the transfer of these missiles, these ballistic missiles that you see being prepared right now in Iran by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, block their transfer to both Hezbollah and Hamas. But we have got to explain what has happened to the American public. We have got to explain to the American public that for 8 months, this prior administration, when ISIS came out of Iraq, did not get them on the open desert when they were in those pickup trucks, where the president said they're just a bunch of guys in pickup trucks, they're the JV team. He would not authorize, despite our collective efforts to get him to do so. And I remember the little exchange, Senator, between you and the president. We were backing you up in that argument about the necessity of deploying U.S. air power. And instead, we watched 14 cities fall, and half of Syria and a third of Iraq fall to ISIS. The only time we took out those training bases was after the attack in Paris. The training bases where they were learning how to bomb, where they were learning how to set up their caliphate on the internet. Those terror camps were not taken out until the day after the Paris attack. They were not taken out by us. They were taken out by the French because this president, outgoing president, had been concerned about collateral damage. That has got to change. The incoming president tells us we're going to defeat ISIS and we're going to defeat their allies around the world. We need to hand off the tools to do that. We need to do it quickly, and we've got to block the kind of terror finance and support that is coming from families in the region, like the Bin Laden construction family, that end up funding these special jihadi, Bini, shall we call them, madrasas that exist across now North Africa, Central Asia, the Balkans. This has to be shut down. This we will do. Thank you.
I want to hone in just a bit more on what's happened to the military over the Obama years. Obviously, there's lots we can talk about, but I think most of us probably don't have an appreciation for the damage that's been done. First, just a reminder, even ourselves, we tend to think, well, we'll wait and see what the Pentagon and the generals tell us they need. But that's not what the Constitution says. The Constitution says that it's our responsibility to raise and support, provide and maintain, provide the rules and regulations for the air and land forces of the United States. That's on our shoulders. And we do that in a world that has grown significantly more dangerous over the Obama years. And I won't spend a lot of time about this, but we all know the increasing aggressiveness of Russia, China building new military bases in the South China Sea. Ed just was talking about North Koreans. We've got ISIS, Al-Qaeda has not gone away, and this threat of cyber from all of those actors plus more that causes us enormous difficulty in figuring out how we're going to respond. And it's not just stealing or manipulating some election data, as many of you all know very well, that is part of the challenge. But let's just look for a second at the budget. The last time there was a defense budget that had any connection to a strategy was in fiscal year 12 by Secretary Gates. And that's that green line there at the top. A couple of years ago, National Defense Panel, equal number of Republicans and Democrats, former Democratic Secretary of State, generals, etc. They said this is the place to start. The Gates FY12 budget is the place to start when we look at defense budget. And then you can see down below what's actually happening. We're roughly $100 billion below that Gates budget this year. But here's the other thing to keep in mind. When the Gates budget that everybody said was connected to strategy was written, Russia had not invaded Crimea. China had built these islands in the South China Sea, and ISIS didn't exist. So FY12 Gates is a good place to start, but just think about how the world has changed over the Obama years, and then look at what we've done. Again, just one brief thing to remind everybody for a little perspective. This is what's happened with big categories of spending since the 1960s. I got to confess, I was surprised. Look down there at the bottom right. This year, defense spending is 14.7% of federal spending. I've been saying 16, 17%. It's 14.7% of federal spending. So I know none of us, all of us are concerned about the deficit. None of us want to blow up the deficit. 14.7% of federal spending for what I believe at least is the first job of the federal government. Again, just a little bit more about what's happened over the Obama years. This is what's happened to the number of people in the Army and Marine Corps through the Obama years. You can see the total number of folks in the active duty component has been cut 10%, but the Army is closer to 12%. I mean 20%. I could have a chart like this for ships, for age of airplanes. You know, the list is endless. The point is, we are smaller and we are weaker than we have been in a long time, while the threats have been growing. And that has real consequences for our people. And so I want to just show a little bit from news clips about some of those consequences to our people.
Friday, the deployment for the carrier strike group has been extended by 30 days. All this as the U.S. ramps up its fight against ISIS in Syria and Iraq. Sailors deployed from Naval Station Norfolk. They're now expected to be home in mid-July. In 2014, the Navy announced plans to shorten the deployment of carriers to 7 months to alleviate the burden on families. So far, those shorter deployments have not gone as planned.
The number of active duty soldiers in the U.S. Army fell below 480,000, the lowest level since the end of World War II. In the past 4 years, the Army has been cut by 80,000 troops. The Army chief has warned about cutting any more.
If one or more possible unforeseen contingencies happen, then the United States Army currently risks not having ready forces. And most importantly, we risk incurring significantly increased U.S. casualties.
Perhaps more alarming is the number of those soldiers who aren't ready to deploy. 190,000 U.S. soldiers are currently deployed in 140 countries around the world. In the next 2 years, the U.S. Army is slated to be cut down to 450,000 troops unless Congress or the Pentagon intervenes.
This is still an active search and rescue operation. Late last night, reported at 11:39, 2 helicopters didn't check in on time, were reported missing.
The multi-agency search for any signs of life went on
let me just go to what we need to do, at least in my opinion. Number one is keep the pressure on, keep reforming the Pentagon. I find that a lot of y'all don't even know what you voted for in the last 2 years. Did you know that you voted for a new retirement system for the military, major changes in health care, 25% reduction in headquarters staff, 11% cut in generals and admirals as well as senior civilians in the military, deep acquisition reform? That's what we've done the last 2 years, and we ain't slowing down. There is a lot more reform that needs to be done, partly to make sure that the taxpayers get more value for their money, but partly so the Pentagon can move at the speed of the threats. So we're going to, John can speak for himself, I'll say for the House, we're going to keep pushing on defense reform. But we also have to deal with the financial situation. Number one, in my view, that is we need to pass the appropriation bill for the rest of this year as soon as possible. There's no reason to wait for it. Secondly, the administration says they're sending over a supplemental in the first 100 days for defense and border security, as I understand it. We need to act on that quickly. Thirdly, we need to do the right thing for FY18 so we can turn around all of those consequences, whether it's training accidents, whether it's a shrinking military, or whatever. Again, this is on our shoulders. This is our responsibility, and we have the opportunity to help the military be in better shape to deal with the threats that we ask them to face.
Mac, that's, I think, a really important presentation you just made, and I'd like to tell my friends one of the great pleasures and honor I've had is working with Mac together. We produced 2 defense authorization bills, which I think move us forward in the areas that Mac has just described. Let me give you the good news, if I can, and I think that's that the team, the national security team that President Trump has assembled, I think, is as strong or better than any that I've ever seen. You look at the credentials of these individuals, including General Flynn, can I change from Susan Rice to General Flynn? And also, was it the songwriter Ben Rose? He was another one of my favorites. But anyway, I think that they're excellent people that I know has the respect and appreciation of all of us, and we'll pay attention to them. The bad news is, and we have to have a little straight talk here, I don't know what the president's policy towards Russia will be. I do know that Putin was a KGB colonel, rushed to restore the Russian Empire. It was divided, it was taken Crimea, it was divided Ukraine, it's putting enormous pressures on the Baltics, is even the Nordic countries, when you look at the Arctic, he is bent on restoring the Russian Empire. And I don't think he's a thug and a bully, and we can't do it in any other way. And I think we have a template for this, and that was one Ronald Reagan who came into the presidency in January 1981 with 3 words: peace through strength. And this gets back to what Mac was just describing about what we need to do in both passing appropriations bills and supplemental. I believe that President Trump will probably be tested by one or more of these forces around the world, whether it be the North Koreans or the Iranians or the Chinese or the Russians. And I hope that all of us will support a response which is proportionate and will also tell Vladimir Putin and the Ayatollahs and the Chinese that there's a new team in town. And my friends, if you look at the world today and you look at the world 8 years ago, you'll see dramatic change. And I could make a coherent and cogent argument that the world is more dangerous than at any any time in the last 70 years. There are pressures on the New World Order that was established in 1947 and 1948, the likes of which we have not seen. The EU is under enormous stress. The challenges in every aspect of our national security are greater. And by the way, I just want to mention one other issue very quickly with you, and that, of course, was what dominated the news for the last these couple months, and that's cyber. My friends, we still have an advantage over any possible adversary that might challenge us. We do not have an advantage in cyber. We do not even have a policy as to how to counter policy. We do know that the Russians tried to influence the outcome of our election. They will be working to influence the elections in France and other European countries in the coming weeks and months. We don't have a policy. We don't have a strategy. And when you look at the potential effects of cyber attacks on our nation, on our economy, on our military capability, Mac and I know Bob also and Ed are going to place enormous attention on cyber. And if we don't, the consequences obviously are severe, and it is the one aspect of our potential confrontation where I believe that our adversaries are ahead of us. It's a hell of a lot easier to play offense in cyber than it is defense. And I'm very proud, really appreciate General Admiral Rogers, who is the head of our cyber unit, and I think he is a real cogent voice for what we need to do. But that has got to be a priority, not just for the Armed Services Committees, but for a number of committees in both House and Senate. My friends, Mac and I call it the defense box. Well, I say to the defense dogs, we need to negate the effects of the Budget Control Act. Some of us are old enough to remember. Oh, we would never do sequestration. The sequestration is a hammer that's over the head of those who are negotiating for a budget agreement. Well, we know what the history is. And Mac just pointed out, my friends, we've cut defense spending less than 21%. Does anybody believe that the world is 21% safer than it was when we passed the Budget Control Act? The purpose of sequestration was to reduce the deficit. The deficit is now higher. My friends, we have planes that can't fly. We have ships that can't leave port. We have a booming retention rate with our pilots because the Vietnam era pilots, airline pilots that were hired after the Vietnam War are now retiring. When you ask any of your young men or women who are pilots and ask them how they like flying 4 hours a month, I'll tell you the Russians and the Chinese are flying a lot more than that a month. And the first thing that always suffers with budget cuts is readiness, operations, maintenance, and training, because that's the easiest one of all. So we've got to spend more. We can discuss how much and what for, but for us to continue down the path that we are, with continued cuts in spending and this odious continuing resolution, which takes care of last year's problems and not next year's problems, is a disgrace. I think we owe our people more than that. And just end with the same thing that's happened in the House Armed Services Committee as the Senate Armed Services Committee. Every single one of our service chiefs testified, including the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, have said the same thing. What we are doing by sequestration and cutting the size of the military, the readiness and capabilities of the military, we are, quote, putting the men and women in uniform at greater risk. That's a direct quote from every single one of them. Don't we owe those men and women more than putting them at greater risk in the name of some kind of meat-axe approach to spending because we don't have the courage to do it in the most effective and reasonable way? So I'm very pleased that President Trump, and I hope he says it again at lunch today, is committed to increasing our defense spending. The last 8 years has been an unmitigated disaster for this country. And I compare it again to 1981 when Ronald Reagan came to the presidency and rebuilt our military and made America the strongest defense nation on earth. The words of Margaret Thatcher, who won the Cold War without firing a shot. So I urge all of us to sit down and work through this thing. And I know we have many other challenges. Healthcare is a very important issue, and I know that a number of others that we're going to address. But my friends, I worry about our ability to stay ahead of our potential adversaries and to respond to a crisis. There's a Rand Corporation story, probably the most respected of all the think tanks, that has some pretty startling and disturbing information and predictions about where we are in relation to our potential adversaries. I hope that everybody would have a chance to look at it. Again, I continue to look forward to working with Mac, and we are, like I said, we have imposed a lot of reforms, things like the whole retirement system and all that. As far as some of the reforms that are necessary in acquisition, personnel, and a number of others, we've got a long way to go. There's too much waste, there's too much inefficiency. When we have an airplane now that first was proposed in 2002, and I have to buy one of these goddamn things every 6 months. It takes us 17 years to build a fighter aircraft. There's something wrong. And so we've got a lot to do in the area of acquisition. I'm sure you've never heard the story about the request for a proposal that the Army had for a pistol. 200 pages. 200 pages for a pistol. You can't make this stuff up. So I hope we'll all sit down together and figure out the best way we can restore our military capabilities and do it in the most efficient way, which is in the best interest not only to the men and women in the military, but also to the taxpayers. Thank you.
If I can just mention one thing, Mac and John have talked about some of the urgent needs today. One of the great legacies, one of the great traditions of our country is always leaving that for the next generation. And, this isn't urgent, but it's happening. It is that Russia right now, we're still involved in life extension programs with our nuclear arsenal. Many of them visit New Mexico and seen that many of the guidance systems that we had on nuclear weapons really are like black and white television tubes. They're not sophisticated. It's this most recent iPhone. So we're spending money modernizing. We're returning our warheads just to make sure that corrosion and all that will not cause them to not operate. But what Russia's doing right now, Russia's building new weapons. I mean, y'all all know about the threat of electromagnetic pulse, a nuclear weapon going on 70 kilometers above our land and just wiping out all the electrical systems. But Russia is building new systems to make sure that they not only are more capable of doing that than we are, but also using them tactically. So again, that's not an urgent need today. We got to get the military to a better place, but it's something where we need to be investing for the future. Because in 40 years, that's a long time, the arsenal we have will be totally obsolete. So what they're doing, as I mentioned again,
In violation of the treaty.
violation of treaty, but they are building new weapon systems where we're just trying to make the ones that we have now that are really old technology operate. Maybe I'll stop.
And Iran is working on it too. But maybe we should go to questions.
Yeah, I think this is the time for questions, comments, suggestions.
Insults.
And y'all are going to have to forgive me. It is hard to see a little bit with the lights. I can't see who it is in the back there. Yes, sir.
Against Roberts here. You know, as a budget and defense talk, seeing the report last month in the Post about the Pentagon study being swells for $125 billion that was out there that could have been saved. You know, what you found out about that, and anything in that we can go as we look to make sure that money's not being wasted over there in the right places.
Yeah. Couple things on that. Number one, we didn't squelch it. As a matter of fact, we cited that specific report about 3 months after it came out in the House passed NDAA. So we took some of their suggestions and have included them in last year's bill and this year's bill. So, and you know, there's lots of reports that come out. I know both in the House and the Senate, we go through them. We look for ideas that we can incorporate, and that's exactly what we did with this. The other thing to keep in mind about that is it said you could save $125 billion over 5 years. To get the full amount, you would have to rewrite every contract the Pentagon had. Because part of their premise was you make all contracts more like commercial contracts. Now that's exactly what John and I are trying to do, is push it that direction, but you can't go back and rewrite all the contracts that were there. So getting the full amount is probably unrealistic, but on the other hand, there were specific things they recommended that you have voted for in last year's NDAA and in this year's.
But I just add also, we've had conversations with General Mattis. This is one of his highest priorities. He knows how the system works. And by the way, we need a good deputy, a guy, a woman who can really make the Pentagon run. And we have a long, long way to go on a lot of this waste and mismanagement. But one of the first things that we can do, and we succeeded to about 90% of them, is stop cost-plus contracts. Stop cost-plus contracts. If your roof leaks and you call somebody in to fix it, you give them a cost-plus contract? What do you expect out of a cost-plus contract? That's how we get these, a lot of these overruns. That sounds simplistic, but there is something to this problem with the industrial military complex.
Senator Johnson?
First of all, guys, great presentation. Like Bob was talking about, we all have other priorities. Matt, you laid out some really good facts. Lamar does a great job of laying out, just in one part, those salient facts that we're all talking about at the same time, use the same powerful figures. So I would just, again, you're concentrating on this, you got access to the best information. If you could accumulate that and present that to us in a pretty simple format, so we are all using the exact same statistics, we know they're bulletproof, nobody can attack them, because we're all going to have to go out and sell rebuilding our military. We're going to have to, you can give us basically the sales pitch for doing so.
Okay, helpful. I was struck, by the way, all the poster presentations yesterday for national security, keeping us safe from terrorism was in the top issues that people wanted from their government, the reasons for their vote, lots of different questions. This was all very high. Comment?
I just mention one small item, and that is that we did in this last year's bill divide up the responsibilities of the acquisition czar. One person to make the Pentagon run, the billions and billions of dollars in contracts and spending and all that, and another one who was another individual directly responsible for acquisition only. We are moving step by step to try to reform the Pentagon. Proud of what we've done.
Well, two things. DDC has for decades relied on over-the-air AFM radios, that kind of stuff, to get their quote-unquote messages out. For a little bit of money, we can break down all those firewalls in China and Iran, and you can go directly to the people that you're talking about. I hope that they reset some of that funding toward getting the more technologically advanced ways to get their messages done. You can help DDC make that happen.
Senator Kennedy is exactly correct. And one of the changes we have made under the law was to broadcast it in all the different dialects across China. But again, you need an administration that cares about sending this kind of message. Another change was for social media. But there are some new technologies, as you correctly point out, that are very, very difficult to jam. We also built the largest transmitter on Tinian Island in the world in order to transmit in a way that's harder to jam. So we need we now have a new administration that cares about sending this messaging. If you think about it, with respect to Eastern Europe, RT television right now is not being bought because 8 years ago, our Secretary of States during that period of time decided to reach out to Russia, and we've largely been dysfunctional in terms of offsetting throughout that region any of the communication that Putin is inundating those people with. So we know how to do it. Now we'll have the will to do it, and we'll also incorporate those new technologies.
I appreciate that. And Senator McCain, as you bring the civilian and military folks in front of your committee for appointments and for confirmation meetings, I would insist that they make auditing the books and records of the Pentagon a top priority. Today we cannot audit the books and records of the Department of Defense. They're unauditable. Now we've made great progress. We've made, since Benedict came through this session, great progress has been made, a lot of forward momentum, but the loss of momentum will occur in change leadership. And so I hope that you and your team insist that be a top priority with the Pentagon. They can work this currently in progress and meet those deadlines in 2017.
Could I just say thank you, and we won't quit on it. One of the more embarrassing aspects of our activities is that we have ordered an audit of the Pentagon for the last 15 years. We have never gotten one. Nobody knows how much we spend. Nobody knows where all of these different aspects of our costs are aligned, and we're making it our top priority. But it's been
I'll look at that. The momentum is there. The leadership, the uniform, and the civilian levels are going after it. But as we saw about that leadership, it needs to make that happen. And don't get my comments piece apart. There are a lot of transactions around the world. I'm a former auditor and understand how difficult it is. But as Patricia said, difficult is not impossible. We need to get it done. But I don't want to denigrate that for saying that leads to this point. I just want you to make sure we don't lose that momentum.
But also, I'd like to maybe sit down with you and get any other additional ideas that could happen, how we could achieve that. It's been one of the more frustrating, obviously, aspects of our work. I thank you for raising it, but we owe it to the American people.
I have Rodney, and then I have Senator Roberts, and then I have Devin, I think. So, Rodney.
I was pleased to hear the applause line for finishing the 2017 appropriations bills. We have 11 bills to finish. Mention was made of the CR, but in reality that's hugely damaging to the military. But I don't think we ought to leave this retreat without a commitment to doing our work. You don't want to kick the last part of this into another 4 months of CR, which basically continues the Obama doctrines. We want to put our mark, as we have in all of our appropriations bills, marks of both the House and Senate members. Thanks for the job you guys are doing.
I would point out, for example, CR is $6 billion less than what we authorized.
Senator Roberts.
I hope we can do a independent supplemental document with the idea that might be possible.
People are saying that it could be as early as March.
Yeah, I think that was the time frame on the speaker's chart. The administration promised first 100 days they would send it, but I don't know.
When I was invited to go to the Pentagon by General Miller in that 9/11 first readiness ready to put steel on the enemy at any time of the year, the United States Marine Corps. I was there with a bunch of brass and went over the Pacific and the contingencies that General Miller and their intelligence sources indicated. And we simply can't beat them because of the lack of personnel. One thing me as a fellow that always wanted to make social experiments in the military. Everybody here has the first obligation of making sure that our national security is protected to the degree that we can protect our individual freedoms. That's not the case today. It's been demonstrated very badly. So I hope we will keep that in mind. I'm thankful for you for everything that you have said and are doing, but we need to get that something out of December 5.
Thank you, sir. I want to thank you and John for the reforms that you've made over the last few years. But, and I know those will be implemented, but as you both know, we ran into so many roadblocks as it relates to intelligence, especially military intelligence, whether it was them manipulating intelligence down at CENTCOM or wasting money here and there. And I just want to call to your attention, and I know you all know this, but the situation we had with the last administration with Assistant Secretary Hedger, who was Bob Works' Chief of Staff, and the memo that he wrote on how to avert Congress, get around Congress, to make things look worse under the sequester, is something that we'll be paying for a long time because the administration in the last 8 years did so many bad things to get around us. And I just want to say, I hope that you both have plans to hold this new administration accountable so that this doesn't happen again what happened the last 8 years where they just could work around us.
I just say, Devin, I totally agree with you on the politicization of all of national security, which was bad, but almost as bad and as worse was the micromanagement of the military from the NSC staff. We're all familiar with former Secretary Gates' famous story of walking by an office in Kabul and there's a red phone and he says, "What is that?" And the guy said, "That's our direct line to the NSC staff." They were deciding even whether and how we should respond to an attack in Kandahar. They had to get permission from the NSC staff. General Flynn was visiting with me the other day and said that they, just the other day before they were out the door, they had a full meeting of all of the NSC staff to decide whether to send 2 Apache helicopters to Afghanistan or not. I'm not taking that out. And I'm not sure that one person can have a profound effect, but if there's anybody that I think that can have a profound effect, it's General Mattis. And Secretary Gates is the finest that I run into, and I see the same traits there that I saw with Secretary Gates. So I'm optimistic.
They wouldn't even allow us to respond to Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan until 6 months ago.
Just a reminder, one of the reforms y'all voted for was to limit the size of the NSC staff. Now, then automatically management that it was a good thing, and General Flynn seemed happy about that.
Exactly.
So we've done good things. I've got Chris and Chris here. So, Mr.
Thank you, gentlemen, and God bless you, and really God bless all of us as we try to fulfill what I think is the fundamental responsibility of the federal government, and that's to keep us safe, to defend American interests. And a personal observation, if I could, but I think it's relevant because it shows a change of thinking in Congress. I'm kind of a new guy. I ran in 2011, came in 2012. The primary reason I ran was because I looked at our debt and our spending, and I said, this is nuts. It doesn't make sense. We can't keep doing this. But many of us have gone through this transformation now, where we look at what we've done to our military. And as a former Air Force pilot, the combat rescue helicopters flew the B-1. When you see that they're flying 4 hours a month, I'm telling you, dude, that is nuts. You can't take off and land safely at 4 hours a month, let alone employ that aircraft as a weapon system, let alone protect your crew, let alone protect the people on the ground, let alone project power. You can't do it, and that's what we've done to our military. So many of us have been torn by this. Many of us have said we have to protect American interests in that sense, but we also can't do it in spin things we do. But we feel now that we've crossed the threshold where we have to address this issue. I want you to know that I've crossed that threshold, and I speak for many of us when I say that. feel that way. And the last thing is that you can't look at our war fighters in the eye. You can't look them in the face and say that we care about them unless we have the courage to fix this now. So it won't be easy, and there's going to be trade-offs. But I'll conclude the way I started. God bless you in doing that, and God bless all of us, because we have to get this one right. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Yeah.
First of all, each of your presentations were outstanding. And more importantly, thank you for your leadership. Very quickly, foreign aid, we all know, except for some assessed contributions like the UN, is granted. And I want to thank President Trump for not only reinstating the Mexico City policy, but expanding it to cover other grant money that unfortunately the NGOs, Planned Parenthood, and others internationally have gotten their hands on and are promoting abortion and lobbying countries to eviscerate their pro-life laws all over Africa and Latin America. It is a huge step forward. We can sustain. I offered the amendment in 1985 when Reagan first put the Mexico City policy forward. All the other groups were saying, and even many of our members in the House and Senate, there's no way groups would accept those conditions. They did, and they were trying to sell armies. So it is worth the fight that we will have to engage in, and we've succeeded in the past. In appeal, I was in Erbil right before Christmas. All of us have worked hard for the Christians and others, the Yazidis who have been put to flight by ISIS. There are 70,000 people in Erbil. Obama, gross indifference towards the Christians. We finally, through Secretary Kerry, named what is happening to them and a few other minority religious groups a genocide. But I have to tell you, I met with hundreds of people, all the top leadership, Archbishop Alberta, the Chaldean Archbishop. They feel totally abandoned by the Obama administration and are looking to us to help them. 70,000 people. I went to a camp where there were 6,000 people, not a dime of U.S. society. And I know all of you care deeply, and I just encourage that now that we, White House.
Chris, I was in those camps too last year, and met with leadership in Christian communities, also Yazidis and others. And it is absolutely the case that this administration showed no more concern. The only reason that they took that action on genocide was because we brought that bill up in committee, and if you recall, the day we passed it was the day they made their decision. Why? Because they knew that was coming to the floor, and once we got past their opposition in committee and put that thing out, they had to take that action. We now have a new president who will step in, and with our focus and direction on this, will do something to make certain that that Christian community on the plain of Nineveh and beyond keeps its historical homeland. But it is going to take our direct engagement here in order to protect the Christian community there. Thanks for raising the issue.
I just say, Chris, that very few benefits of old age, but one of them is to know you for so many years. No one is far harder, longer and more heroically for the rights of the young one than you have, all of us.
Chris, I think one of the last meetings we had at the end of the year, John and I was with you on a related topic, and when the president signed his most recent executive order, you're the person that I followed.
I'm just going to go back to this side of the room. Yes, sir.
I would love to hear your thoughts on your vision, prediction strategies with regards to the JCPOA, and your thoughts on the Trump administration's vision, strategy, predictions with regards to the JCPOA.
I'll just
No, go ahead. I'll let you go.
Well, the first observation I would make is that Iran is already on compliance on the agreement. And that gives us several opportunities. I can think of 3 separate areas where they're already in violation. extend by 10 years the Iran sanctions, and we find them out of compliance, we have ample opportunity, but a lot of that has to start with our engagement with our European allies. We need a total review announced by the new administration over Iran policy. If we do that, I think it gives us an opportunity to check the impulse of many of these companies in Europe to invest and around the world in Iran. And so far, you'll notice that despite our former Secretary of State Kerry going out on the world stage and announcing Iran is open for business, and being the head cheerleader like he's head of the Chamber of Commerce to get investment in there, the investment's not going in. And if we now take this attitude, reviewing this, and beginning to point out they're out of compliance, and begin to take action against their ballistic missile program, which is in violation, and go after the IRGC for the fact that they've got military units now that have overthrown the government of Yemen, led by the IRGC and the Quds forces, and make an issue of what they're doing in Bahrain. Now they've got forces also in Saudi. If we point all of this out and go after their human rights abuses, I think we can help at least hold in abeyance while we get the communication system of Radio Free Iran up and running. We need a different approach here.
Yeah, I would say, look, in spite of the fact that we may analyze what all the threats are in the world, including North Korea, when a new president comes in, likely they're going to be challenged by something they haven't even thought of. And that's the likely. So I think where they're going to be on the JCPOA, they know they're in violation on ballistic missiles. They know they're in violation on conventional weapons purchases. They know they're in violation on heavy water. And I think what you're going to see them do is come in and radically enforce the agreement. I think they understand just to come in and rip up an agreement, as you understand, it's not even a signed agreement, it's a non-binding political commitment. But to rip it up on the front end and create a crisis is not something they're planning to do, at least at present. What they want to do is enforce it and make it Iran, make it about Iran, or make it about our European allies that won't take the steps through the UN Security Council to make sure we push back on these violations. Simultaneously, this was just a nuclear agreement, but pushing back against the things that I just mentioned, what's happening in Yemen, what's happening in Syria, and other places. So I think those are the first steps. In spite of this incredibly flawed agreement where we gave up all of our leverage on the front end, the fact is that over the next couple of years, from a nuclear standpoint, there's nothing that's going to happen in Iran that's a danger to our country over the next couple of years. And so I think they're going to build a case against them methodically, and I actually think that's the best course of action for them to take.
I'm saying in your back trying to get your attention. You've got.
I can see you. Well, wait. I'm gonna go to the lady before you, and then I'll come back. Right? You're right under the light, which is a problem. All right, Barb, did you have something?
I did. Thanks all of you for your leadership. It's really an honor to be serving Mac's team on the Armed Services Committee. I just want to reiterate the readiness issue with our aviators. Having been an aviator, there's a push-pull factor. The airlines are hiring like gangbusters, but these men and women will stay in the military if they feel that they're, valued and they have a purpose and they're, they're mission focused. And the situation we have right now is devastating to them. Their readiness rates are very low, and this is a crisis. So I just want to reiterate that as a former aviator. And while we're talking about rolling out the Obama policies, I just would say this is more for the whole group. I hope we do not consider as a team to roll back a policy that opens all positions in the military to women. Some will call this social engineering. I call this a readiness issue. If we're trying to have the best military, and 1 in 5 are qualified when they come through the door, we need to recruit from 100% of our population, not 50%. And if we believe in conservative values and equal opportunity and meritocracy, we should let people compete, pick the best man for the job, even if it's a woman. Physical requirements are certainly important, but so is aptitude, leadership, courage. Women have been in combat, they've died, they've killed the enemy, shown on the battlefield, and training what they can do. So I hope, that we don't just systematically say that women can't do these positions. It's like saying Justin Bieber's qualified, but Serena Williams is not. as an example. So let's be consistent with our conservative values and let women serve and let them. It is the right position. It's not wrong.
Can I just say, I agree with everything you say, but I am not and will not reduce the physical requirements for any branch of service that they're intended there. I'd also like to point out that the Congresswoman, unlike me, the number of landings does match the number of takeoffs.
Just for qualifications, only shouldn't be a disqualifier.
Okay, Turner.
Thank you. I don't know how to follow, but just agree with those. I want to thank each of you, not only for your great presentation, but the fact that you really were standing in the gap to prevent President Obama from doing even further damage on our foreign policy stage and to our military. Senator McCain, thank you for your impassioned statements concerning sequestration. Just like Obamacare, sequestration is an Obama administration proposal that we have watched do untold damage to our military. Just like our repeal of Obamacare, we have the ability to repeal sequestration with respect to the military. It doesn't require a repeal of the Budget Control Act with respect to the military itself. We do have the ability to do that. The President has called for that. I hope that he mentions that in his comments. He has said it since he's been sworn in. It is on the White House website as a goal for this Congress to implement a bill that would repeal sequestration with respect to the military. I wanted to ask you guys to just speak for just a moment on the effects of sequestration as it requires budgetary mechanics that really damage the military. It's not just an issue of the top line. It also is an issue of the ability to discretionarily fund our military. It's forced us to do the fiction of overseas contingency funding on top of the base funding within Razi can speak internationally. But if you speak to a moment as to why it would be so important for us to repeal sequestration for the military to hand this president the actual power that he needs to go around.
Well, thank you, Mike, and thank you for all your great work. I don't know why, but thinking of our departing Secretary of State, who thanked the Iranians for returning American sailors that the illegally and total violation of all international law captured. We thank the Iranians for their return. Reminded of the old country and western song, thank God and Greyhound is gone. But anyway, we're gonna have to convince people as part of some. We've got to convince our colleagues that we will continue the reforms and eliminate a great deal of the waste and mismanagement that still exists. If we're going to have credibility, we can't have these reports of $135 billion that was wasted. We can't have an aircraft carrier that's supposed to cost $10 billion and now costs $13 billion. We can't have those things. And right up, it is amongst our highest priorities. But if we do mindless sequestration, then at some point it begins to affect the morale of these young men and women. And they aren't all going to head for the exit sign, but I can tell you some of the best and the brightest will, because they have other options. And if you're a Navy or Air Force or Marine pilot and you're flying 4 hours a month, I'm telling you, that is not job satisfaction. That is not what's going to keep these brave young men and women in the service.
Senator, if I could just add also in terms of our lack of force projection, if you're a friend or ally of the United States, let's look at the Gulf states right now, and you do not see that carrier fleet in the Persian Gulf, and you're in a situation now where Iranian agents and Quds forces are in your country. Let's say you're Bahrain, and they're reaching out to your minority population, Shia population. They're doing the same thing in Saudi Arabia right now. And you know that the government has already fallen up from Yemen. And you know that in the Straits, we are not even protecting U.S. flag vessels going through there. What does that do to the thinking, to the esprit de corps of those in Saudi special forces that are out there in the Shia portion of Saudi Arabia fighting this low-level insurgency that most of us aren't even aware of? What does it do in Bahrain? What does it do in the rest of the Gulf states while we watch Iran move through with the attempt to stretch that crescent all the way to Lebanon? What does it do in Azerbaijan when those Iranian agents are going door to door saying, why are you supporting the secular government? You should be supporting the Shia revolution. This is a reality. Our actions here matter in terms of how it's perceived by our friends and allies that are a little skittish right now in terms of standing up and doing what we ask them to do. This is enormous leverage for our foreign policy objectives.
I just came back from a trip to the Baltics. One urgent request that they all made a permanent United States presence, no matter how small, but they want American military in those countries permanently.
You mentioned sequestration. I think it's really thank you for your leadership. We ought to also let's do away with this sham of OCO funding. Come on. I mean, we're better than that. And by the way, Mulvaney, who we all know well, I think he wants to rid us of this dishonest budgeting. But look, I think most people in this room like what John and Matt are saying about building military. So, again, we start establishing revenue baselines. Be honest with us. I'm worried as I watch presentations and I see the huge red lines going up in the future. We act like we're going to deal with that through some healthcare reforms. I mean, we're not being honest with each other. So if we really have the courage to support our fighting men and women, it has to come with the other side of the equation. And I fear that what we're going to do when we leave here is get all excited about all these other things that are deserved. They're hard to do, they're deserved. But there's a spinach side of this that if we don't deal with, we're not going to be able to come close to dealing with the needs of our country. And I fear we're going to leave here without thinking about the other side of the equation.
Gentlemen, thank you. I appreciate your support of all this. I know it's very hard and all these decisions are very tough. I just have a couple of things that I'd like to ask, comment. First is cyber. You spoke about it, but I think a lot of folks understand that 20 years ago, the world's strongest supercomputer, every single individual in the world has access to that computer powered out in their gaming console. So things are happening very, very quickly, and not just from the individual or transnational actors like crimes syndicates or terrorist organizations, but they're a huge threat to undermining their whole nation-state apparatus. However, nation-states still reign supreme. And when you look at the response to the past administration, the previous administration, on cyber attacks, not just election stuff, but also stealing 10 million records or whatever from folks. My records are probably gone. I don't know where they are, and somebody's got them. But those things aren't little espionage targets anymore. Those things are national security threats. So isn't it time that we voice our opinion to have sort of a new virtual commando-type doctrine or something that has a uniform response to attacks on our, not just our infrastructure, but also mass stealing of our nation's secrets, from everything from the small military contractor that doesn't have the budget to deal with cyber threats to mass stealing of military and veterans records. Isn't it time that we have a collective response to the administration that push forth to have them go negotiate with powers in the world to have a no-go criteria for attacks on cyber?
Can I just say that one of the greatest failings to me of this previous administration was the fact that in spite of the knowledge that all of us have about cyber attacks and them taking place and all of the aspects of these different ones that were publicized, much less those that were not, this administration never developed a policy. If you don't have a policy, then you don't have a strategy. There was never in other words, you see an attack coming, what do? You're attacked, what do? What provisions, how serious the attack is and what the response has to be. They treated every single attack as an isolated incident, so therefore we never developed a policy or a strategy to counter cyber. So this administration has got to start really at ground zero, and it's exactly as you point out. I have great confidence, by the way, in Admiral Rogers. If he's given the policy, I think he's a really remarkable leader.
We would love to work together with you to figure out what constitutes an act of aggression, what is an act of war, and actually put a policy out there. Like you said, the previous administration isolated it because they wanted to control the political fallout from it. But that doesn't make us safe. And I'm not working on that. The second thing is that you heard a lot about readiness in the military. This is also to my colleagues as well, too. One of the things that it's not just the readiness of our pilots, but it's also, there's 1% of the nation that is going back and forth over and over again. Millennials get a lot of crap generation, but the reality is they're all the folks who have gone back and forth for the past 15 years. So there's not, the soldier has been devastated, the families have been devastated. In my district, anything that happens anywhere in the world, we got people there, period. So when we look at budgets, this is the question, is that, I understand threading the needle between the budget that we need for defense, and of course we have this discipline. But are we going to look at, and Senator McCain, you mentioned it, I was asked about it, I was responding to your comment, but speaking about expensive programs that may not deal with the rest of the day and tomorrow, and also BRAC, to excess infrastructure that's extremely expensive to deal with. I know if I had a second home and I live there, I'm probably not going to keep it because I'm not going to be able to afford it. So is that something that's going to be on the table to be able to get these budgets in line? And then just to add to that, I understand, for a lot of folks that are fiscal hawks, it's very difficult to say, hey, we don't know what the Pentagon's spending, so we don't know what they're spending, but we should increase spending. That's a difficult thing to sell to our own people. But that's the question: is BRAC going to be on the table to invent some very expensive programs that may create some jobs in people's districts? But the reality is, if we keep spending on them, you actually aren't supporting your troops because you're hurting the individual troop by keeping those expensive programs that are not new and infrastructure.
Well, if I could just say, part of the problem with BRAC is many of us have a bitter taste in our mouth from 2005. Last time I checked last year, we had not yet broken even more than 10 years later. So is it possible we can have another BRAC? Yes. Are we going to do what was done in 2005? No. I've been trying to get the Pentagon to give us updated data on what they think our excess infrastructure is. And the last administration actually did it. Hopefully we'll have a better relationship.
That's what BRAC is a little bit like sequestration because Congress won't make the tough decisions to give it to our people. And that's why I'm very reluctant. I recognize that I talk about it a lot. I need to talk to all of our colleagues because it is such a draconian measure. If we could give maybe the Pentagon a chance to sell us over what they think we ought to be doing, and then if the populism is still so strong that we can't act, then maybe we would have to go to Iraq. But maybe I'm placing too many eggs in the basket of General Madison and team around him, but at least we ought to try to start doing it the right way rather than consigning it to some people we don't know. And as Max said, the last week, for example, we closed 1 or 2 major Navy bases on the East Coast. Their bases on the East Coast. We've only got one left, Oceana. Drove the decision to close Naval Air Station Cecil Field. That's just one example of the right decisions that because of the way it's set up, they're doing it.
There are lots of problems with the last one. Okay, Mark has agreed to one more. Senator Corner.
It seems to me that we once again failed to talk about the 600 pound, well, the elephant in the room, and that is mandatory spending. I'm exactly right on floating budgeting, and all you gentlemen are right for underfunding the military, which is our number one obligation.
I think need to be done ratings-wise, and others, unless we're willing to do the tough stuff. We can't put off for 10 years dealing with these issues. I'm sorry, I'm leaving here a little discouraged. I mean, the points that were made, the small points, those need to be addressed too. There's no question. We have some waste at the Pentagon that needs to be dealt with, and y'all done a great job fighting these guys. But there's symptoms of the bigger issue that Cornyn has mentioned. Unless we have the moral fortitude and courage to deal with the elephant in the room, all this other stuff we're talking about is a total waste of time. And then to look at a revenue base that's lower than where we are today and not be willing to deal with this, I'm sorry. I wonder sometimes where we as a party are going. One of our national security is our first responsibility, but leaving the nation greater for other people certainly is up there. And we're not willing to deal with this. I got to tell you, I think we'll have a second retreat or some period of time back to the Capitol where we really focus on the issues that are going to take our country down the tube. But there's no discussion of that here today, so thank you, Leader. I look forward to solving it.